and welcome back to Storytime. Oh, I need to take those things down. So sorry about that. Hi, Kickin. How are you doing? I loved seeing your mini. Thank you so much for posting it up on the Discord. I did want to mention before I went too much further, when I chose this book, of course, we had a lot of unrest in our country of late. And, of course, there was a lot of violence the last year, a lot of deaths. But I was not, of course, I wasn't expecting the amount that we saw yesterday, just, filled with hate and rage and stuff like that. And it's interesting, as I'm reading this, there are a few parallels. I mean, of course, the people who were, beheading the people of society, the aristocrats, they were the ones who had been, just trodden all over for hundreds of years, and they were sick of it, and unfortunately they took an extremely, excessively violent way to it, and of course, you get that whole who is right? Is it right to do this? We want, of course, Marguerite does want to, she does definitely have sympathy for the people of the Republic of France. However, she does not agree with the excessive acts that they're using, so it's interesting. Ooh, wow, 3 hours on a boss on Zelda. I mean, I have done 3 or 4 hours for a dungeon in Wizard 101. It is amazing how long it can be. I'm not really familiar with the conversion between pounds and dollars, but yeah, I know that they can get a bit expensive, those minis, especially the material that you order and if it's pre-painted or not. And welcome, Carell. Thank you for emerging from the realm of darkness and shadows to join us for Storytime. Ah, yes. Okay, I'll see you in a moment, Kickin. But yeah, I was not expecting quite the violence that we saw yesterday. So just a precursor before I go back into the Scarlet Pimpernel and the French Revolution. Woohoo, yeah. It's interesting to see all the different sides, all for the excessive use want to side with, and also a quick reminder, when they talk about Republicans in the book, it means the people who are a part of the Republic of France. The people who are standing up to the long-time aristocratic bullies. Oh, okay, I gotcha. I do remember looking at the pricing of that and going, man, I really want, but I'm not really in a place financially where I can shell out for a mini, especially, if you're not sure, how long you're going to be playing with that character, although one of my characters for certain I am going to be continuing with. I really enjoy my fighter character, Lady Zita Ellis Hetherington, who is a noble, but she believes that it is the noble's duty to take care of the, the non-nobles, the common folk? Yeah, common folk. And so she really gets upset when she sees common folk being mistreated, because she's like, that is not what we do with our power. What we do with our power is we make everybody's life better, and we get rid of evil and wrong and stuff like that. And yeah. But she is a lot of fun. She is the one who knits to kind of wind down after a long day of adventuring. That's what she does during her short and long rests. And the knitting needle has actually come in quite handy in the adventures. One time she managed to pick a lock that the rogue wasn't able to pick. That was a pretty impressive one. She was able to get some, some loot out from a crack in the walls. But I think my shining moment with that was we had to chase after some guy who was using magic to rise through some little hole in the ceiling. And none of them had that sort of magic. None of them had a grappling hook. So she's like, you know what I do have? I have a knitting needle and I have very strong wool. So I must have rolled about 3 natural 20s and managed to not only launch it and get it to stick in the wall, but climbed up the wool, and it held my weight, and make it all the way to the top. I think that was probably my biggest accomplishment with that knitting needle. You know, it's played an elf that looked at nobles as peasants and peasants as dirt. Oh dear. I have actually, hey Mr. Brightside, good to see you. I was glad that I got to catch some of your stream last night. My character, Lady Azita, or we just call her Azita, she was on this really nice train line that was run by the high elves, and she is trying to investigate some problem, and the guy just looks at her like, you have no authority here. And she's like, look, I have credentials, I'm a noble. And he just tears up the credentials, and I'm just like, no, I can't do that. But yeah, she got a Clydesdale from that adventure, so it wasn't a total wash. And she killed a vampire, like an old vampire. Not a bad one, not Ukarel, of course. Single-handedly, because she was trying to feed off of all of the people on the train. Yeah. You have very little minis. Same one for different characters. Well, yeah, totally. I have one mini. I did buy it for my first campaign, and it looked like this sort of flowy. I played a sylph, and she's basically descended of a coupling of a human and an air djinn. And so she always has these little puffs of air that sort of make her hair move a bit. She has a little bit of control over air, and she has blue streaks in her white hair, which is, part of the description of the thing. So I'm not being Mary Sue about it. And that mini I've been using for all of my campaigns, and some of them it totally works with, but she doesn't quite have the battle axe, which, by the way, battle axe is amazing, especially the one that I have, or the one that she has. It was this a family heirloom. All of her family have been knights in service, and this is something that's been hundreds and hundreds of years old, has seen many victories. And while they were on an adventure, there were these gems. She picked up a couple of them. They were opals, I think. And then we came to this little dragon statuette, and it had a little bowl in the statuette. So she's like, I might take a risk. And so she put one of the gems in the bowl, and it just started to glow, and it got this magical quality. So she's like, I'm going to take an even bigger risk, and she sets it against the blade of her battle axe. And it becomes an enchanted battle axe where if you roll a 19 or a 20, you also get electrical damage on top of the damage that you do, and she's also really strong. So if I roll a 19 or a 20 and if I crit, I have about like 8 or so. Oh, and also she has, I forget what it's called, Battle Master. I think it's Battle Master. I'm not really sure. It's where if you choose the feat on that turn, you also get to add a D8. So I've got the D12, the battle axe, the couple D6s of my strength. Or no, the D6 was for the electro damage. And then I add the strength to it, of course. And then the D8 of the Battle Master thing. And then you double it, and it's just like this enormous handful of dice that are going to just wipe out every living enemy. So it was definitely fun. I have been enjoying her, so I'm definitely going to continue with her. Might like put together a mini for her one of these days. I could maybe buy one, but we'll see. I won't. I haven't been able to play in a year. It's been so long. Okay. Oh yeah, and of course, let's see with the all these changes. Oh, okay. Enhanced dice that works for you, but against everyone else. Whoa! Oh my! That's like a dream rogue device there. Ooh, a goblin tinker, a librarian. Nice, nice. Upgrade. And 20 different reforges. 10 under that. Okay, nice. It's so fun to hear about other people's campaigns and their different a 3D printer. Yeah, I've actually that is when you go on Heroes Forge, they give you the option of they can make you one. They have several different materials that they use, and of course depending on the material that you choose, but you can also, just for like the least expensive price, you can get the file for the plans for the 3D printer. And there is actually at our library, when it opens again, they have a 3D printer there, which under a certain size you don't have to pay for, since it's part of the library system. Yeah, so I've definitely been playing around with that, like getting the file for it and then 3D printing it or something. Yeah. I love hearing about the homebrews too, because like you get some fantastic things, like Percy in Critical Role. He was a homebrew character because there weren't firearms in D&D at that time. And so he sort of, and they had started out playing on Pathfinder, which is what I started with as well. Yeah, so they started out with Pathfinder. He was playing this dual-wielding gunslinger. They didn't have a gunslinger in D&D. So Matt Mercer, ye god of DMs, just kind of homebrewed as sort of, he's technically a fighter, is his class. There we go. Well, before you stop playing, you're looking at using a TV and a program called Map Tools. Oh, yeah, I've heard of Map Tools. Everything on the computer for mapping. Yeah, I've heard of Map Tools and a couple of other things like that. it's pretty sweet what, we can now do on the internet if we can't game together. Or I think that when they started Campaign 2 of Critical Role, he had a bunch of maps on like this screen. Or no, wait, I think I'm thinking of somebody I watch on YouTube, Devin But Better. Her partner, I think, they made this enormous widescreen TV, sort of married it with a table, and so it became their D&D table, and he could pull up the maps on that, and they could use that as their playing mat. That's pretty cool. Yeah, D20 mapping, cool. Well, I think I've chatted for like 15 minutes. I probably better get to the story, but definitely keep chatting with each other, and we'll go ahead and get started. So we are halfway through the Scarlet Pimpernel right now. Let me hide Meister here. Where is he? There he is. Chapter 17, Farewell. When Marguerite reached her room, she found her maid terribly anxious about her. "Your ladyship will be so tired," said the poor woman, whose own eyes were half closed with sleep. "It is 5:30. But, yes, Louise, I dare say I shall be tired presently," said Marguerite kindly. "But you are very tired now, so go on to bed at once. I will get into bed alone." "But, my lady, do not argue, Louise. Go to bed. Give me a wrap and leave me alone." Louise was only too glad to obey. She took off her mistress's gorgeous ball gown and wrapped her up in a soft, billowy gown. "Does your ladyship wish for anything else?" she asked when that was done. "No, nothing more. Put out my lights as you go out." "Yes, my lady. Good night, my lady." "Good night, Louise." When the maid was gone, Marguerite drew aside the curtains and threw open the windows. The garden and the river beyond were flooded with rosy light. Far away to the east, the rays of the shining sun had changed the rose into vivid gold. The lawn was deserted now, and Marguerite looked down upon the terrace where she had stood a few moments ago, trying vainly to win back a man's love, which once had been so wholly hers. It was strange that through all her troubles, all her anxiety for Armand, she was mostly conscious at the present moment of a keen and bitter headache. Her very limbs seemed to ache with longing for the love of a man who had spurned her, who had resisted her tenderness, remained cold to her appeals, and had not responded to the glow of passion which had caused her to feel and hope that those happy golden days in Paris were not all dead and forgotten. How strange it all was. She loved him still, and now that she looked back upon the last few months of misunderstandings and of loneliness, she realized that she had never ceased to love him, that deep down in her heart she had always vaguely felt that his foolish inanities, his empty laugh, his lazy nonchalance, were nothing but a mask, that the real man, strong, passionate, willful, was still there. The man she had loved, whose intensity had fascinated her, whose personality attracted her, since she had always felt that behind his apparently slow wits there was a certain something which he had kept hidden from all the world, and mostly especially from her. A woman's heart is such a complex problem. The owner thereof is often more incompetent and find The owner thereof is often most incompetent to find the solution of his puzzle. But did Marguerite Blakeney, the cleverest woman in Europe, really love a fool? Was it love that she had felt for him a year ago when she married him? Was it love she felt for him now that she realized that he still loved her, but he would not become her slave, her passionate, ardent lover once again? Nay, Marguerite herself could not have told that. Not at this moment, at any rate. Perhaps her pride had sealed her mind against a better understanding of her own heart. But this she did know, that she meant to capture that obstinate heart back again, that she would conquer once more, and then that she would never lose him. She would keep him, keep his love, deserve it, and cherish it. But this much was certain, that there was no longer any happiness possible for her without that one man's love. Thus, the most contradictory thoughts and emotions rushed madly through her mind. Absorbed in them, she had allowed time to slip by. Perhaps tired out with long excitement, she had actually closed her eyes and sunk into a troubled sleep, wherein quickly fleeting dreams seemed but the continuation of her anxious thoughts, when suddenly she was roused from dream or meditation by the noise of footsteps outside her door. Nervously she jumped up and listened. The house itself was as still as ever. The footsteps had retreated. Through her wide-open window the brilliant rays of the morning sun were flooding her room with light. She looked up at the clock. It was 6:30, too early for any of the household to be already astir. She certainly must have dropped asleep, quite unconsciously. The noise of the footsteps, also, of hushed, subdued voices, had awakened her. What could they be? Gently, on tiptoe, she crossed the room and opened the door to listen. Not a sound. That peculiar stillness of the early morning when sleep with all mankind is at its heaviest. But the noise had made her nervous, and when suddenly, at her feet on the very doorstep, she saw something white laying there. A letter, evidently. She hardly dared touch it. It seemed so ghost-like. It certainly was not there when she came downstairs. Had Louise dropped it? Or was some tantalizing spook at play, showing her fairy letters where none existed? At last she stopped to pick it up, and amazed, puzzled beyond measure, she saw that the letter was addressed to herself in her husband's large, business-like-looking hand. What could he have to say to her in the middle of the night, which could not be put off until the morning? She tore open the envelope and read, "A most unforeseen circumstance forces me to leave for the north immediately, so I beg your ladyship's pardon if I do not avail myself of the honour of bidding you good-bye. My business may keep me employed for about a week, so I shall not have the privilege of being present at your ladyship's water party on Wednesday. I remain your ladyship's most humble and most obedient servant, Percy Blakeney." Marguerite must suddenly have been imbued with her husband's slowness of intellect, for she had perforce to read the few simple lines over and over again before she could fully grasp their meaning. She stood on the landing, turning over and over in her hand his curt and mysterious epistle. Her mind a blank, her nerves strained with agitation, and a presentiment she could not very well have explained. Sir Percy owned considerable property in the north, certainly, and he had often before gone there alone and stayed away a week at a time. But it seemed so very strange that circumstances should have arisen between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning that compelled him to start in this extreme hurry. Vainly she tried to shake off an unaccustomed feeling of nervousness. She was trembling from head to foot. A wild, unconquerable desire seized her to see her husband again, at once, if only he had not already started. Forgetting the fact that she was only very lightly clad in a morning wrap, and that her hair lay loosely about her shoulders, she flew down the stairs, right through the hall towards the front door. It was as usual, barred and bolted, for the indoor servants were not yet up. But her keen ears had detected the sound of voices and the pawing of a horse's hoof against the flagstones. With nervous, trembling fingers, Marguerite undid the bolts one by one, bruising her hand, hurting her nails, for the locks were heavy and stiff. But she did not care. Her whole frame shook with anxiety at the very thought that she might be too late, that he might have gone without her seeing him and bidding him Godspeed. At last she had turned the key and thrown open the door. Her ears had not deceived her. A groom was standing close by, holding a couple of horses. One of these was Sultan, Sir Percy's favorite and swiftest horse, saddled ready for a journey. The next moment Sir Percy himself appeared round the further corner of the house and came quickly towards the horses. He had changed his gorgeous ball costume, but was, as usual, irreproachably and richly apparelled in a suit of fine cloth, with lace jabot and ruffles, high-topped boots, and riding breeches. Marguerite went forward a few steps. He looked up and saw her. A slight frown appeared between his eyes. "You are going?" she said quickly and feverishly. "Whither?" "As I have had the honour of informing your ladyship, urgent, most unexpected business calls me to the north this morning," he said in his usual cold, drawly manner. "But your guests tomorrow? I have prayed your ladyship to offer my humble excuses to his royal highness. You are such a perfect hostess. I did not think that I shall be missed." "But surely you might have waited for your journey until after our water party," she said, still speaking quickly and nervously. "Surely the business is not so urgent, and you said nothing about it just now." "My business, as I had the honour to tell you, madame, is as unexpected as it is urgent. May I therefore crave your permission to go? Can I do aught for you in town on my way back?" No, thanks. Nothing. But you will be back soon, very soon. Before the end of the week? I cannot say." He was evidently trying to get away, whilst she was straining every nerve to keep him back for a moment or two. "Percy," she said, "will you not tell me why you go today? Surely I, as your wife, have a right to know. You have not been called away to the north. I know it. There were no letters, no couriers from there. Before we left for the opera last night, nothing was waiting for you, and we returned from the ball. You are not going to the north, I feel convinced. There is some mystery, and—" "Nay, there is no mystery, madam," he replied, with a slight tone of impatience. "My business has to do with Armand. There! Now have I your leave to depart?" "With Armand? But you will run no danger?" "Danger? I? Nay, madame, your solicitude does me honour. As you say, I have some influence. My intention is to exert it before it be too late." "Will you allow me to thank you at least?" "Nay, madam," he said coldly. "There is no need for that. My life is at your service, and I am already more than repaid." "And mine will be at yours, Sir Percy, if you will just but accept it in exchange for what you do for Armand," she said, as impulsively she stretched out both her hands to him. "There, I will not detain you. My thoughts go with you. Farewell." How lovely she looked in this morning sunlight, with her ardent hair streaming round her shoulders. He bowed very low and kissed her hand. She felt the burning kiss, and her heart thrilled with joy and hope. "You will come back?" she said tenderly. "Very soon," he replied, looking longingly into her blue eyes. And you will remember?" she asked, as her eyes, in response to his look, gave him an infinity of promise. "I will always remember, madame, that you have honored me by commanding my services." The words were cold and formal, but they did not chill her this time. Her woman's heart had read his, beneath the impassive mask his pride still forced him to wear. He bowed to her again, then begged her leave to depart. She stood on one side, whilst he jumped on to Sultan's back. Then, as he galloped out of the gates, she waved him a final adieu. A bend in the road soon hid him from view. His confidential groom had some difficulty in keeping pace with him, for Sultan flew along in response to his master's excited mood. Marguerite, with a sigh that was almost a happy one, turned and went inside. She went back to her room, for suddenly, like a tired child, she felt quite sleepy. Her heart seemed all at once to be in complete peace, and, though it still ached with undefined longing, a vague and delicious hope soothed it as with a balm. She felt no longer anxious about Armand. The man who had just ridden away, bent on helping her brother, inspired her with complete confidence in his strength and in his power. She marveled at herself for having ever looked upon him as an inane fool. Of course, that was a mask worn to hide the bitter wound she had dealt to his faith and to his love. His passion would have overmastered him, and he would not let her see how much he still cared and how deeply he suffered. But now all would be well. She would crush her own pride, humble it before him, tell him everything, trust him in everything, and those happy days would come back when they used to wander off together in the forests of Fontainebleau, where they spoke little, for he was always a silent man, but when she felt that against that strong heart she would always find rest and happiness. The more she thought of the events of the past night, the less fear had she of Chauvelin and his schemes. He had failed to discover the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Of that she felt sure. Both Lord Fancourt and Chauvelin himself had assured her that no longer had Chauvelin himself but Lord Fancourt and Chauvelin himself had assured her that no one had been in the dining room at 1 o'clock except the Frenchman himself and Percy. Yes, Percy! She might have asked him, had she thought of it. Anyways, she had no fear that the unknown and brave hero would fall in Chauvelin's lap. His death, at any rate, would not be at her door. Armand certainly was still in danger, but Percy had pledged his word that Armand would be safe, and somehow, as Marguerite had seen him riding away, the possibility that he could fail in whatever he undertook never even remotely crossed her mind. When Armand was safely over in England, she would not allow him to go back to France. She felt almost happy now, drawing the curtains closely together again to shut out the piercing sun. She went to bed at last, laid her head upon the pillow, and like a wearied child, soon fell into a peaceful and dreamless sleep. Oh, really quickly, in response to that, Kicken, my first game that I played, I had a homebrew. It was a combination of an animal companion and a familiar. And I chose a hawk because I played a wizard and druid, like, she was a dual class or double class? Yeah, double classed in wizard and druid. And so for a wizard you can have a familiar. With a druid you can have an animal companion. And so we decided on a hawk that would start out as a tiny hawk and then it would just keep on growing until it got to the point where I could ride my hawk if I wanted to. But actually that came in handy because I had a cape that allowed me to wild shape one time a day. And so if we and our companions had to get anywhere, like, travel to an island or something like that, I would wild shape into a giant hawk, and then my hawk would carry another one of them, and yeah, it was super helpful. Just wanted to mention that since you had mentioned the eagle with the cursed eye, which is really cool. All right. Chapter 18, The Mysterious Device. The day was well advanced when Marguerite woke, refreshed by her long sleep. Louise had brought her some fresh milk and a dish of fruit, and she partook of its frugal breakfast with hearty appetite. Thoughts crowded thick and fast in her mind as she munched her grapes. Most of them went galloping away after the tall, erect figure of her husband, whom she had watched riding out of sight more than 5 hours ago. The thoughts galloped away, not the grapes. My brain had galloping grapes. In answer to her eager inquiries, Louise brought back the news that the groom had come home with Sultan, having left Sir Percy in London. The groom thought that his master was going to get on board his schooner, which was lying off just below London Bridge. Sir Percy had ridden thus far, had then met Briggs, the skipper of the Daily Dream, and had sent the groom back to Richmond with Sultan in the empty saddle. This news puzzled Marguerite more than ever. Where could Sir Percy be going just now in the Daydream? On Armand's behalf, he had said. Well, Sir Percy had influential friends everywhere. Perhaps he was going to Greenwich, But Marguerite ceased to conjecture. All would be explained anon. He said he would come back and that he would remember. A long, idle day lay before Marguerite. She was expected to the visit of her old schoolfellow, little Suzanne de Tournay. With all the merry mischief at her command, she had tendered her request for Suzanne's company to the Comtesse in the presence of the Prince of Wales last night. His Royal Highness had loudly applauded the notion, and declared that he would give himself the pleasure of calling on the two ladies in the course of the afternoon. The Comtesse had not dared to refuse, and then and there was entrapped with a promise to send little Suzanne to spend a long and happy day at Richmond with her friend. Marguerite expected her eagerly. She longed for a chat about old school days with the child. She felt that she would prefer Suzanne's company to that of anyone else, and together they would roam through the fine old garden, rich deer park, or stroll along the river. But Suzanne had not come yet. Marguerite, being dressed, prepared to go downstairs. She looked quite a girl this morning in her simple muslin frock, with a broad blue sash round her slim waist, and the dainty crossover fichu, into which, at her bosom, she had fastened a few late crimson roses. She crossed the landing outside her own suite of apartments, and stood there for a moment at the head of the fine oak staircase which led to the lower floor. On her left were her husband's apartments, a suite of rooms which she practically never entered. They consisted of bedroom, dressing and reception room, and, at the extreme end of the landing, of a small study which, when Sir Percy did not use it, was always kept locked. His own special and confidential valet, Frank, had charge of his room. No one was ever allowed to go inside. My lady had never cared to do so, and the other servants had, of course, not dared to break this hand-and-fast rule. Marguerite had often, with that good-natured contempt which she had recently adopted towards her husband, chafed him with this secrecy which surrounded his private study. Laughingly, she had always declared that he strictly excluded all prying eyes from his sanctum, for fear they should detect how very little study went on within its four walls. A comfortable armchair for Sir Percy's sweet slumbers was, no doubt, its most conspicuous piece of furniture. Marguerite thought of all this on this bright October morning as she glanced along the corridor. Frank was evidently busy with his master's room, for most of the doors stood open, that of the study amongst the others. A sudden, burning, childish curiosity seized her to have a peep at Sir Percy's sanctum. The restriction, of course, did not apply to her, and Frank would, of course, not dare to oppose her. Still, she hoped that the valet would be busy in one of the other rooms, that she might have that one quick peep in secret and unmolested. Gently, on tiptoe, she crossed the landing, and like Bluebeard's wife, trembling half with excitement and wonder, she paused a moment on the threshold, strangely perturbed and irresolute. The door was ajar, and she could not see anything within. She pushed it open tentatively. There was no sound. Frank was evidently not there, and she walked boldly in. At once she was struck by the severe simplicity of everything around her. The dark and heavy hangings, the massive oak furniture, the one or two maps on the wall, in no way recalled to her mind the lazy man about town, the lover of racecourses, the dandified leader of fashion that was the outward representation of Sir Percy Blakeney. There was no sign here, at any rate, of hurried departure. Everything was in its place, not a scrap of paper littered the floor, not a cupboard or drawer was left open. The curtains were drawn aside, and through the open window the fresh morning air was streaming in. Facing the window, and well into the center of the room, stood a ponderous business-like desk, which looked as if it had seen much service. On the wall to the left of the desk, reaching almost from floor to ceiling, was a large full-length portrait of a woman, magnificently framed, exquisitely painted, and signed with the name of Boucher. It was Percy's mother. Marguerite knew very little about her, except that she had died abroad, ailing in body as well as in mind, when Percy was still a lad. She must have been a very beautiful woman once, when Boucher painted her, and as Marguerite looked at the portrait, she could not but be struck by the extraordinary resemblance which must have existed between mother and son. There was the same low, square forehead, crowned with thick, fair hair, smooth and heavy. The same deep-set, somewhat lazy blue eyes beneath firmly marked, straight brows. And in those eyes there was the same intensity behind that apparent laziness. The same latent passion which used to light up Percy's face in the olden days before his marriage, and which Marguerite had again noted last night at dawn when she had come quite close to him and had allowed a note of tenderness to creep into her voice. Marguerite studied the portrait, for it interested her. After that, she turned and looked again at the ponderous desk. It was covered with a mass of papers all neatly tied and docketed, which looked like accounts and receipts arrayed with perfect method. It had never before struck Marguerite, nor had she, alas, found it worth while to inquire, as to how Sir Percy, whom all the world had credited with a total lack of brains, administered the vast fortune which his father had left him. Since she had entered this neat, orderly room, she had been taken so much by surprise that this obvious proof of her husband's strong business capacities did not cause her more than a passing thought of wonder. It also strengthened her in the now certain knowledge that, with its worldly inanities, his foppish ways, and foolish talk, he was not only wearing a mask, but was playing a deliberate and studied part. Marguerite wondered again. Why should he take all this trouble? Why should he, who was obviously a serious, earnest man, wish to appear before his fellow men as an empty-headed nincompoop? He may have wished to hide his love for a wife who held him in contempt, but surely such an object could have been gained at less sacrifice, and with far less trouble than constant, incessant acting of an unnatural part. She looked around her quite aimlessly. Quite aimlessly now. She was horribly puzzled, and a nameless dread before all this strange, unaccountable mystery had begun to seize upon her. She felt cold and uncomfortable suddenly in this severe and dark room. There were no pictures on the wall save the fine Boucher portrait, only a couple of maps, both of parts of France, one of the north coast and the other of the environs of Paris. What did Sir Percy want with those, she wondered. Her head began to ache. She turned away from this strange Bluebeard's chamber, which she had entered, and which she did not understand. She did not wish Frank to find her there, and with a last look round, she once more turned to the door. As she did so, her foot knocked against a small object which had apparently been lying close to the desk, on the carpet, and which now went rolling right across the room. She stooped to pick it up. It was a solid gold ring with a flat shield, on which was engraved a small device. Marguerite turned it over in her fingers, and then studied the engraving on the shield. It represented a small star-shaped flower, of a shape she had seen so distinctly twice before, once at the opera, and once at Lord Grenville's ball. Chapter 19. The Scarlet Pimpernel. At what particular moment the strange doubt first crept into Marguerite's mind she could not herself afterwards have said. With the ring tightly clutched in her hand, she had run out of the room, down the stairs and out into the garden, where, in complete seclusion, alone with the flowers and the river and the birds, she could look again at the ring and study that device more closely. Stupidly, senselessly, now, sitting beneath the shade of an overhanging sycamore, she was looking at the plain gold shield with the star-shaped little flower engraved upon it. Ha! It was ridiculous. She was dreaming. Her nerves were overwrought, and she saw signs and mysteries in the most trivial coincidences. Had not everybody about town recently made a point of affecting the device of that mysterious and heroic Scarlet Pimpernel? Did she not herself wear it embroidered on her gowns, set in gems and enameled in her hair? What was there strange in the fact that Sir Percy should have chosen to use the device as a seal ring? He might easily have done that, yes, quite easily, and besides, what connection could there be between her exquisite dandy of a husband, with his fine clothes and refined, lazy ways, and the daring plotter who rescued French victims from beneath the very eyes of the leaders of a bloodthirsty revolution? Her thoughts were in a whirl, her mind a blank. She did not see anything that was going on around her, and was quite startled when a fresh young voice called to her across the garden. "Chérie! Chérie, where are you?" And little Suzanne, fresh as a rosebud, with eyes dancing with glee, and brown curls fluttering in the soft morning breeze, came running across the lawn. "You told me you were in the garden. They told me you were in the garden," she went on, prattling merrily and throwing herself with pretty girlish impulse into Marguerite's arms. "So I ran out to give you a surprise. You did not expect me quite so soon, did you, my darling little Margot, chérie?" Marguerite, who had hastily concealed the ring in the folds of her handkerchief, tried to respond gaily and unconcernedly to the young girl's impulsiveness. "Indeed, sweet one," she said with a smile, "it is delightful to have you all to myself, and for a nice whole long day. You won't be bored." "Oh, bored? Margot, how can you say such a wicked thing? Why, when we were in the dear old convent together, we were always happy when we were allowed to be alone together, and to talk secrets." The two young girls had linked their arms in one another's, and began wandering round the garden. "Oh, how lovely your home is, Margot, darling," said little Suzanne enthusiastically, "and how happy you must be." "Aye, indeed, I ought to be happy, oughtn't I, sweet one?" said Marguerite, with a wistful little sigh. "How sadly you say it, chérie." "Oh, well, I suppose, now that you are a married woman and won't care to talk secrets with me any longer, Oh, what lots and lots of secrets we used to have at school. Do you remember? Some we did not even confide to Sister Teresa of the Holy Angels, though she was such a dear. And now you have one all-important secret, little one, said Marguerite merrily, which you are forthwith going to confide in me. Nay, you need not blush, chérie, she added as she saw Suzanne's pretty little face crimson with blushes. Faith, there's not to be ashamed of. He is a noble and true man, and one to be proud of as a lover and as a husband. Indeed, chérie, I am not ashamed, rejoined Suzanne softly. And it makes me sad, and it makes me very, very proud to hear you speak so well of him. I think Maman will consent, she added thoughtfully, and I shall be, oh, so happy. But of course, nothing is to be thought of until Papa is safe. Marguerite started. Suzanne's father, the Comte de Tournay, one of those whose life would be jeopardized if Chauvelin succeeded in establishing the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel. She had understood all along from the Comtesse, and also from one or two of the members of the League, that their mysterious leader had pledged his honor to bring the fugitive Comte de Tournay safely out of France. Whilst little Suzanne, conscious of all, save her own all-important little secret, went prattling on, Marguerite's thoughts went back to the events of the past night. Armand's peril, Chauvelin's threat, his cruel either-or, which she had accepted, and then her own work in the matter, which should have culminated at 1 o'clock in Lord Grenville's dining room, when the relentless agent of the French government would finally learn who was this mysterious Scarlet Pimpernel who so openly defied an army of spies and placed himself so boldly, and for mere sport, on the side of the enemies of France. Since then she had heard nothing from Chauvelin. She had concluded that he had failed, and yet, she said, not felt anxious about Armand, and yet she had not felt anxious about Armand, because her husband had promised her that Armand would be safe. But now, suddenly, as Suzanne prattled merrily along, an awful horror came upon her for what she had done. Chauvelin had told her nothing, it was true, but she remembered how sarcastic and evil he had looked when she took final leave of him after the ball. Had he discovered something then? Had he already laid his plans for catching the daring plotter red-handed in France and sending him to the guillotine without compunction or delay? Marguerite turned sick with horror, and her hand convulsively clutched the ring in her dress. "You are not listening, chérie," said Suzanne reproachfully as she paused in her long, highly interesting narrative. Yes, darling, indeed I am," said Marguerite with an effort, forcing herself to smile. "I love to hear you talking, and your happiness makes me so very glad. Have no fear, we will manage to propitiate Maman. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes is a noble English gentleman. He has money and position. The Comtesse will not refuse her consent. But now, little one, tell me, what is the latest news about your father?" "Oh," said Suzanne with mad glee, "the best we could possibly hear. My Lord Hastings came to see Maman earlier this morning. He said that all was now well with dear Papa, and we may safely expect him here in England in less than 4 days." "Yes," said Marguerite, whose glowing eyes were fastened on Suzanne's lips as she continued merrily. "Oh, we have no fear now. You don't know, chérie, but that great and noble Scarlet Pimpernel himself has gone to save Papa. He is gone, chérie, actually gone," added Suzanne excitedly. "He was in London this morning. He will be in Calais perhaps tomorrow, where he will meet Papa, and then the blow had fallen. She had expected it all along, though she had tried for the last half-hour to delude herself and to cheat for fears. He had gone to Calais, had been in London this morning. He, the Scarlet Pimpernel, Percy Blakeney, her husband, whom she had betrayed last night to Chauvelin. Percy, her husband, Scarlet Pimpernel. Oh, how could she have been so blind? She understood it now, all at once. That part he played, the mask he wore in order to throw dust in everybody's eyes. And all for sheer sport and devilry, of course, saving men, women, and children from death as other men destroy and kill animals for the excitement, the love of the thing, the idle rich man wanting some aim in life. He, and the few young bucks he enrolled under his banner, had amused themselves for months in risking their lives for the sake of an innocent few. Perhaps he had meant to tell her when they were first married, and then the story of the Marquis de St-Cyr had come to his ears, and he had suddenly turned from her, thinking, no doubt, that she might some day betray him and his comrades, who had sworn to follow him. And so he had tricked her, as he had tricked all others, whilst hundreds now owed their lives to him, and many families owed him both life and happiness. The mask of the inane fop had been a good one, and the part consummately well played. No wonder that Chauvelin's spies had failed to detect in the apparently brainless nincompoop the man whose reckless daring and resourceful ingenuity had baffled the keenest French spies, both in France and in England. Even last night, when Chauvelin went to Lord Grenville's dining room to seek that daring Scarlet Pimpernel, he only saw that inane Sir Percy Blakeney fast asleep in a corner of the sofa. Had this astute mind guessed the secret then? Here lay the whole awful, horrible, amazing puzzle. In betraying a nameless stranger to his fate in order to save her brother, had Marguerite Blakeney sent her husband to his death? No, 1,000 times no. Surely fate could not deal a blow like that. Nature itself would rise in revolt. In hand, when it held that tiny scrap of paper last night, would surely have been struck numb ere it committed a deed so appalling and so terrible. "What is it, chérie?" said little Suzanne, now genuinely alarmed, for Marguerite's color had become dull and ashen. "Are you ill, Marguerite? What is it?" Nothing, child," she murmured as in a dream. "Wait a moment. Let me think. You said the Scarlet Pimpernel is gone today? Marguerite, chérie, what is it? You frighten me." "It's nothing, child, I tell you, nothing. I must be alone a minute. Dear one, I may have to curtail our time together today. I may have to go away. You'll understand?" "I understand that something has happened, chérie, and that you want to be alone. I won't be a hindrance to you. Don't think of me. My maid Lucille has not yet gone. We will go back together. Don't think of me." She threw her arms impulsively round Marguerite. Child as she was, she felt the poignancy of her friend's grief, and with the infinite tact of her girlish tenderness, she did not try to pry into it, but was ready to efface herself. She kissed Marguerite again and again, then walked sadly back across the lawn. Marguerite did not move. She remained there thinking, wondering what was to be done. Just as little Suzanne was about to mount the terrace steps, a groom came running round the house towards his mistress. He carried a sealed letter in his hand. Suzanne instinctively turned back. Her heart told her that here, perhaps, was further ill news for her friend, and she felt that her poor Margot was not in a fit state to bear any more. The groom stood respectfully beside his mistress. Then he handed her the sealed letter. "What is it?" asked Marguerite. "Just come by runner, my lady." Marguerite took the letter mechanically and turned it over in her trembling fingers. "Who sent it?" she asked. "The runner said, milady," replied the groom, "that his orders were to deliver this, and that your ladyship would understand from whom it came." Marguerite tore open the envelope. Already her instinct had told her what it contained, and her eyes only glanced at it mechanically. It was a letter written by Armand St-Just to Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, the letter which Chauvelin's spies had stolen at the Fisherman's Rest, and which Chauvelin had held as a rod over her to enforce her obedience. Now he had kept his word. He had sent her back St-Just's compromising letter, for he was on the track of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Marguerite's senses reeled. Her very soul seemed to be leaving her body. She tottered and would have fallen but for Suzanne's arms around her waist. With superhuman effort she regained control over herself. There was yet much to be done. "Bring that runner here to me," she said to the servant with much calm. "He has not gone?" "No, my lady." The groom went, and Marguerite turned to Suzanne. "And you, child, run within. Tell Lucille to get ready. I fear that I must send you home, child, and stay, tell one of the maids to prepare a traveling dress and cloak for me." Suzanne made no reply. She kissed Marguerite tenderly and obeyed without a word. The child was overawed by the terrible, nameless misery in her friend's face. A minute later the groom returned, followed by the runner who had brought the letter. "Who gave you this packet?" asked Marguerite. "A gentleman, my lady," replied the man, "at the Rose and Thistle, inn opposite Charing Cross. He said you would understand." "At the Rose and Thistle? What was he doing?" "He was waiting for the coach, your ladyship, which he had offered." "The coach?" "Yes, my lady, a special coach he had ordered. I understood from his man that he was posting straight to Dover." "That's enough, you may go." Then she turned to the groom. "My coach and the 4 swiftest horses in the stable to be ready at once." The groom and runner both went quickly off to obey. Marguerite remained standing for a moment on the lawn, quite alone. Her graceful figure was as rigid as a statue. Her eyes were fixed. Her hands were tightly clasped across her breast. Her lips moved as they murmured with pathetic, heartbreaking persistence. "What to be done? What's to be done? Where to find him? Oh, God, grant me light." But this was not the moment for remorse and despair. She had done, unwittingly, an awful and terrible thing, the very worst crime in her eyes that woman ever committed. She saw it in all its horrors. Her very blindness in not having guessed her husband's secret seemed now to her another deadly sin. She ought to have known. She ought to have known. How could she imagine that a man who could love with so much intensity as Percy Blakeney had loved her from the first? How could such a man be the brainless idiot he chose to appear? She, at least, ought to have known that he was wearing a mask, and having found that out, she should have torn it from his face whenever they were alone together. Her love for him had been paltry and weak, easily crushed by her own pride, and she, too, had worn a mask entertaining a contempt for him, whilst, as a matter of fact, she completely misunderstood him. But there was no time now to go over the past. By her own blindness she had sinned. Now she must repay not by empty remorse, but by prompt and useful action. Percy had started for Calais, utterly unconscious of the fact that his most relentless enemy was on his heels. She had set sail early that morning from London Bridge. Provided he had a favorable wind, he would no doubt be in France within 24 hours. No doubt he had reckoned on the wind and chosen this route. Chauvelin, on the other hand, would post at Dover, charter a vessel there, and undoubtedly reach Calais much about the same time. Once in Calais, Percy would meet all those who were eagerly waiting for the noble and brave Scarlet Pimpernel who had come to rescue them from horrible and unmerited death. With Chauvelin's eyes now fixed upon his every movement, Percy would thus not only be endangering his own life, but that of Suzanne's father, the old Comte de Tournay, and of those other fugitives who were waiting for him and trusting in him. There was also Armand, who had gone to meet de Tournay, secure in the knowledge that the Scarlet Pimpernel was watching over his safety. Hang on a second. All these lives, and that of her husband, lay in Marguerite's hands. These she must save if human pluck and ingenuity were equal to the task. Unfortunately, she could not do all this quite alone. Once in Calais, she would not know where to find her husband, whilst Chauvelin, in stealing the papers at Dover, had obtained the whole itinerary. Above everything, she wished to warn Percy. She knew enough about him by now to understand that he would never abandon those who trusted in him, that he would not turn back from danger and leave the Comte de Tournay to fall into the bloodthirsty hands that knew of no mercy. But he was warned. He might form new plans. But if he were warned, he might form new plans, be more wary, more prudent. Unconsciously, he might fall into a cunning trap, but once warned, he might yet succeed. And if he failed, if indeed fate and Chauvelin, with all the resources at his command, proved too strong for the daring plotter after all, then at least she would be there by his side to confront, love, and cherish, to cheat death perhaps at the last by making it seem sweet. If they both died together, locked in each other's arms, with the supreme happiness of knowing that passion had responded to passion, and that all misunderstandings were at an end. Her whole body stiffened as with a great and firm resolution. This she must do, if God gave her wits and strength. This she meant to do. Her eyes lost their fixed look. They glowed with inward fire at the thought of meeting him again so soon, in the very midst of most deadly perils. They sparkled with the joy of sharing these dangers with him, of helping him perhaps, of being with him at the last, if she failed. The childlike sweet face had become hard and set. The curved mouth was closed tightly over her clenched teeth. She meant to do or die, with him and for his sake. A frown which spoke of an iron will and unbending resolution appeared between the two straight brows. Already her plans were formed. She would go and find Sir Andrew Ffoulkes first. He was Percy's best friend, and Marguerite remembered with a thrill with what blind enthusiasm the young man always spoke of his mysterious leader. He would help her where she needed help. Her coach was ready. A change of raiment and a farewell to little Suzanne, and she could be on her way. Without hesitation, without hesitation, she walked quietly into the house. Just really quickly checking on something. Chapter 20. The Friend. Less than half an hour later, Marguerite, buried in thoughts, sat inside her coach, which was bearing her swiftly to London. She had taken an affectionate farewell of little Suzanne, and seen the child safely started with her maid, and in her own coach, back to town. She had sent one courier with a respectful letter of excuse to His Royal Highness, begging for a postponement of the August visit, on account of pressing and urgent business, and another on ahead to bespeak a fresh relay of horses at Faversham. Then she had changed her muslin frock for a dark travelling costume and mantle, had provided herself with money, which her husband's lavishness always placed fully at her disposal, and had started on her way. She did not attempt to delude herself with any vain and futile hopes. The safety of her brother Armand was to have been conditional on the imminent capture of the Scarlet Pimpernel. As Chauvelin had sent her back Armand's compromising letter, there was no doubt that he was quite satisfied in his own mind that Percy Blakeney was the man whose death he had sworn to bring about. No, there was no room for any fond delusions. Percy, the husband whom she loved with all the ardor which her admiration for his bravery had kindled, was in immediate, deadly peril through her hand. She had betrayed him to his enemy, unwittingly 'tis true, but she had betrayed him, and if Chauvelin succeeded in trapping him, who so far was unaware of this danger, then his death would be at her door. His death, when with her very heart's blood she would have defended him and given willingly her life for his. She had ordered her coach to drive her to the Crown Inn. Once there, she told her coachman to give the horses food and rest. Then she ordered a chair and had herself carried to the house in Pall Mall where Sir Andrew Ffoulkes lived. Among all Percy's friends who were enrolled under his daring banner, she felt that she would prefer to confide in Sir Andrew Ffoulkes. He had always been her friend, and now his love for little Suzanne had brought him closer to her still. Had he been away from home, gone on the mad errand with Percy, perhaps, then she would have called on Lord Hastings or Lord Tony, for she wanted the help of one of these young men, and she would be indeed powerless to save her husband. Or she would be. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, however, was at home, and his servant introduced her ladyship immediately. She went upstairs to the young man's comfortable bachelor's chamber, and was shown into a small, though luxuriously furnished, dining room. A moment or two later, Sir Andrew himself appeared. He had evidently been much startled when he heard who his lady visitor was, for he looked anxiously, even suspiciously, at Marguerite, whilst performing the elaborate bows before her, which the rigid etiquette of the time demanded. Marguerite had laid aside every vestige of nervousness. She was perfectly calm, and having returned the young man's elaborate salute, she began very calmly. "Sir Andrew, I have no desire to waste valuable time in much talk. You must take certain things I am going to tell you for granted. These will be of no importance. What is important is that your leader and comrade, the Scarlet Pimpernel, my husband, Percy Blakeney, is in deadly peril." Had she had the remotest doubt of the correctness of her deductions, she would have had them confirmed now, for Sir Andrew, completely taken by surprise, had grown very pale, and was quite incapable of making the slightest attempt at clever parrying. "No matter how I know this, Sir Andrew," she continued quietly, "thank God that I do, and that perhaps it is not too late to save him. Unfortunately, I cannot do this quite alone, and therefore have come to you for help." "Lady Blakeney," said the young man, trying to recover himself. "Will you hear me first?" she interrupted. "This is how the matter stands. When the agent of the French government stole your papers that night in Dover, he found amongst them certain plans, which you or your leader meant to carry out for the rescue of the Comte de Tournay and others. The Scarlet Pimpernel, Percy, my husband, has gone on this errand himself today. Chauvelin knows that the Scarlet Pimpernel and Percy Blakeney are one and the same person. He will follow you to Calais, and there will lay hands on him. They will follow him to Calais. You know as well as I do the fate that awaits him at the hands of the revolutionary government of France. No interference from England, from King George himself, would save him. Robespierre and his gang would see to it that the interference came too late. But not only that, the much trusted leader will also have been unconsciously the means of revealing the hiding place of the Comte de Tournay and of all those who, even now, are placing their hopes in him." She had spoken quietly, dispassionately, and with firm, unbending resolution. Her purpose was to make that young man trust and help her, for she could do nothing without him. "I do not understand," he repeated, trying to gain time to think what was best to be done. But I think you do, Sir Andrew. You must know that I am speaking the truth. Look these facts straight in the face. Percy has sailed for Calais, I presume for some lonely part of the coast, and Chauvelin is on his track. He has posted for Dover, and will cross the Channel, probably tonight. What do you think will happen?" The young man was silent. "Percy will arrive at his destination, unconscious of being followed. He will seek out de Tournay and the others. Among these is Armand St-Just, my brother. He will seek them out, one after another, probably not knowing that the sharpest eyes in the world are watching his every move. When he has thus unconsciously betrayed those who blindly trust in him, when nothing can be gained from him, and he is ready to come back to England with those whom he has gone so bravely to save, the doors of the trap will close upon him, and he will be sent to end his noble life upon the guillotine." Sir Andrew was silent. "You do not trust me," she said passionately. "Oh, God! Cannot you see that I am in deadly earnest? Man, she added, whilst with her tiny hands she seized the young man suddenly by the shoulders, forcing him to look straight at her. "Tell me, do I look like that vilest thing on earth, a woman who would betray her own husband?" "God forbid, Lady Blakeney," said the young man at last, "that I should attribute such evil motives to you, but what? Tell me. Quick, man, the very seconds are precious." "Will you tell me," he asked resolutely and looking searchingly into her blue eyes, "whose hand helped to guide Monsieur Chauvelin to the knowledge which you say you possess, that he possesses?" "Mine," she said quietly. "I own it. I will not lie to you, for I wish you to trust me absolutely, but I had no idea, how could I have, of the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel, and my brother's safety was to be my prize if I succeeded." "In helping Chauvelin to track the Scarlet Pimpernel?" She nodded. "It is no use telling you how he forced my hand. Armand is more than a brother to me, and how could I guess? But we waste time, Sir Andrew. Every second is precious. In the name of God, my husband is in peril. Your friend, your comrade. Help me to save him." Sir Andrew felt his position to be a very awkward one. The oath he had taken before his leader and comrade was one of obedience and secrecy, and yet the beautiful woman who was asking him to trust her was undoubtedly in earnest. His friend and leader was equally undoubtedly in imminent danger, and Lady Blakeney, he said at last, "God knows you have perplexed me so that I do not know which way my duty lies. But tell me what you wish me to do. There are 19 of us ready to lay down our lives for the Scarlet Pimpernel if he was in danger." "There is no need for lives just now, my friend," she said dryly. "My wits and 4 swift horses will serve the necessary purpose. But I must know where to find him. See," she added, while her eyes filled with tears, "I have humbled myself before you. I have owned my fault to you. Shall I also confess my weaknesses? My husband and I have been estranged because he did not trust me, and because I was too blind to understand. You must confess that the bandage which he put over my eyes was a very thick one. Is it small wonder that I did not see through it? But last night, after I led him unwittingly into such deadly peril, it suddenly fell from my eyes. If you will not help me, Sir Andrew, I would still strive to save my husband. I would still exert every faculty I possess for his sake, but I might be powerless, for I might arrive too late, and nothing would be left for you but lifelong remorse and for me a broken heart." "Lady Blakeney," said the young man, touched by the gentle earnestness of his exquisitely beautiful woman, Do you know that what you propose doing is man's work? You cannot possibly journey to Calais alone. You would be running the greatest possible risk to yourself and your chances of finding your husband now, were I to direct you ever so carefully, are infinitely remote. Oh, I hope there are risks, she murmured softly. I hope there are dangers, too. I have so much to atone for. But I fear you are mistaken. Chauvelin's eyes are fixed upon you all. He will scarce notice me. Quick, Sir Andrew. The coach is ready, and there is not a moment to be lost. I must get to him. I must, she repeated with almost savage energy, to warn him that that man is on his track. Can't you see that I must get to him, even if it be too late to save him, at least to be by his side at the last. Faith, madam, you must command me. Gladly would I or any of my comrades lay down our lives for your husband. If you will go yourself, nay, friend, do you not see that I will go mad if I let you go without me? She stretched out her hand to him. You will trust me? I wait your orders, he said simply. Listen then. My coach is ready to take me to Dover. Do you follow me as swiftly as horses will take you? We meet at nightfall at the Fisherman's Rest. Chauvelin would avoid it, as he is known there, and I think it would be the safest. I will gladly accept your escort to Calais. As you say, I might see As you say, I might miss Sir Percy, were you to direct me ever so carefully. We'll charter a schooner at Dover and cross over during the night. Disguised, if you will agree to it. As my lackey, you will, I think, escape detection. I am entirely at your service, madame, rejoined the young man earnestly. I trust to God that you will sight the Daydream before we reach Calais. With Chauvelin at his heels, every time the Scarlet Pimpernel takes on French soil is fraught with danger. God grant it, Sir Andrew. But now, farewell. We meet tonight at Dover. It will be a race between Chauvelin and me across the Channel tonight, and the prize? The life of the Scarlet Pimpernel. He kissed her hand and then escorted her to her chair. A quarter of an hour later, she was back at the Crown Inn, where her coach and horses were ready and waiting for her. The next moment they thundered along the London streets and then straight on to the Dover road at maddening speed. She had no time for despair now. She was up and doing and had no leisure to think. With Sir Andrew Ffoulkes as her companion and ally, hope had once again revived in her heart. God would be merciful. He would not allow so appalling a crime to be committed as the death of a brave man through the hand of a woman who loved him and worshipped him and who would gladly have died for his sake. Marguerite's thoughts flew back to him, the mysterious hero whom he had always consciously loved, when his identity was still unknown to her. Laughingly, in the olden days, she used to call him the shadowy king of her heart, and now she had suddenly hoped that this enigmatic personality, whom she had worshipped, and the man who loved her so passionately, were one and the same. What wonder that one or two happier visions began to force their way before her mind. She vaguely wondered what she would say to him when first they would stand face to face. She had had so many anxieties, so much excitement during the past few hours, that she allowed herself the luxury of nursing these few more hopeful, brighter thoughts. Gradually, the rumble of the coach wheels, with its incessant monotony, acted soothingly on her nerves. Her eyes, aching with fatigue and many shed and unshed tears, closed involuntarily, and she fell into a troubled sleep. Chapter 21. Suspense. It was late into the night when she at last reached the Fisherman's Rest. She had done the whole journey in less than 8 hours, thanks to innumerable changes of horses at the various coaching stations, for which she always paid lavishly, thus obtaining the very best and swiftest that could be had. Her coachman, too, had been indefatigable. The promise of special and rich reward had no doubt helped to keep him up, and he had literally burned the ground beneath his mistress's coach wheels. The arrival of Lady Blakeney in the middle of the night caused a considerable flutter at the Fisherman's Rest. Sally jumped hastily out of bed, and Mr. Jellyband was at great pains how to make his important guest comfortable. Both these good folk were far too well drilled in the manners appertaining to innkeepers to exhibit the slightest surprise at Lady Blakeney's arrival, alone at this extraordinary hour. No doubt they thought all the more, but Marguerite was far too absorbed in the importance, the deadly earnestness of her journey to stop and ponder over trifles of that sort. The coffee-room, the scene lately of the dastardly outrage on 2 English gentlemen, was quite as deserted. Mr. Jellyband hastily relit the lamp, rekindled a cheerful bit of fire in the great hearth, and then wheeled a comfortable chair by it, into which Marguerite gratefully sank. "Will your ladyship stay the night?" asked pretty Miss Sally, who was already busy laying a snow-white cloth on the table, preparatory to providing a simple supper for her ladyship. "No, not the whole night," replied Marguerite. "At any rate, I shall not want any room but this. If I can have it to myself for an hour or two." "It is at your ladyship's service," said honest Jellyband, whose rubicund face was set in its tightest folds, lest it should betray before the quality that boundless astonishment which the worthy fellow had begun to feel. "I shall be crossing over at the first turn of the tide," said Marguerite, "and in the first schooner I can get, but my coachman and men will stay the night, and probably several days longer, so I hope you will make them comfortable." "Yes, my lady, I'll look after them. Shall Sally bring your ladyship some supper?" "Yes, please. But put something cold on the table, and as soon as Sir Andrew Ffoulkes comes, show him in here." "Yes, my lady." Honest Jellyband's face now expressed distress in spite of himself. He had great regard for Sir Percy Blakeney, and did not like to see his lady running away with young Sir Andrew. Of course, it was no business of his, and Mr. Jellyband was no gossip. Still, in his heart, he recollected that her ladyship was after all only one of them foreigners. What wonder that she was immoral like the rest of them. "Don't sit up, honest Jellyband," continued Marguerite kindly, "nor you either, Mistress Sally. Sir Andrew may be late." Jellyband was only too willing that Sally should go to bed. He was beginning not to like these goings-on at all. Still, Lady Blakeney would pay handsomely for the accommodation, and it certainly was no business of his. Sally arranged a simple supper of cold meat, wine, and fruit on the table. Then, with a respectful curtsy, she retired, wondering in her little mind why her ladyship looked so serious when she was about to elope with her gallant. Then commenced a period of weary waiting for Marguerite. She knew that Sir Andrew, who would have to provide himself with clothes befitting a lackey, could not possibly reach Dover for at least a couple of hours. He was a splendid horseman, of course, and she would make light in such an emergency of the 70-odd miles between London and Dover. He would, too, literally burn the ground beneath his horse's hoofs, but he might not always get very good remounts, and in any case, he could not have started from London until at least an hour after she did. She had seen nothing of Chauvelin on the road. Her coachman, whom she questioned, had not seen anyone answering that description. The description his mistress gave him of the wizened figure of the little Frenchman. Evidently, therefore, he had been ahead of her all the time. She had not dared to question the people at the various inns where they had stopped to change horses. She feared that Chauvelin had spies all along the route who might overhear her questions, then outdistance her and warn her enemy of her approach. Now she wondered at what inn he might be stopping, or whether he had had the good luck of chartering a vessel already, and was now himself on the way to France. That thought gripped her at the heart as with an iron vice. If indeed she should be too late already. The loneliness of the room overwhelmed her. Everything within was so horribly still. The ticking of the grandfather clock, dreadfully slow and measured, was the only sound which broke this awful loneliness. Marguerite had need of all her energy, all her steadfastness of purpose, to keep up her courage through this weary midnight waiting. Everyone else in the house, but herself, must have been asleep. She had heard Sally go upstairs. Mr. Jellyband had gone to see her to her coachman and men, and then had returned and taken up a position under the porch outside, just when Marguerite had first met Chauvelin about a week ago. He evidently meant to wait up for Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, but was soon overcome by sweet slumbers, for presently, in addition to the slow ticking of the clock, Marguerite could hear the monotonous and dulcet tones of the worthy fellow's breathing. For some time now, he had realized that the beautiful, warm October's day, so happily begun, had turned into a rough and cold night. She had felt very chilly, and was glad of the cheerful blaze in the hearth. But gradually, as time wore on, the weather became more rough, and the sound of the great breakers against the Admiralty Pier, though some distance from the inn, came to her as the noise of muffled thunder. The wind was becoming boisterous, rattling the leaded windows and the massive doors of the old-fashioned house. It shook the trees outside and roared down the vast chimney. Marguerite wondered if the wind would be favorable for her journey. She had no fear of the storm, and would have braved worse risks sooner than delay the crossing by an hour. A sudden commotion outside roused her from her meditations. Evidently it was Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, just arrived in mad haste, for she heard his horse's hoofs thundering on the flagstones outside. Then Mr. Jellyband's sleepy yet cheerful tones bidding him welcome. For a moment, then, the awkwardness of her position struck Marguerite, alone at this hour, in a place where she was well known, and having made an assignation with a young cavalier, equally well known, and who arrived in disguise. What food for gossip to those mischievously inclined! The idea struck Marguerite chiefly from its humorous side. There was such quaint contrast between the seriousness of her errand and the construction which would naturally be put on her actions by honest Mr. Jellyband, that for the first time since many hours a little smile began playing round the corners of her childlike mouth, and when presently Sir Andrew, almost unrecognizable in his lackey-like garb, entered the coffee-room, she was able to greet him with quite a merry laugh. "Faith, monsieur, my lackey," she said, "I am satisfied with your appearance." Mr. Jellyband had followed Sir Andrew, looking strangely perplexed. The young gallant's disguise had confirmed his worst suspicions. Without a smile upon his jovial face, he drew the cork from the bottle of wine, set the chairs ready, and prepared to wait. "Thanks, honest friend," said Marguerite, who was still smiling at the thought of what the worthy fellow must be thinking at that very moment. "We shall require nothing more, and here's for all the trouble you have been put to on our account." She handed 2 or 3 gold pieces to Jellyband, who took them respectfully and with becoming gratitude. "Stay, Lady Blakeney," interposed Sir Andrew as Jellyband was about to retire. "I am afraid we shall require something more of my friend Jelly's hospitality. I am sorry to say we cannot cross over tonight." "Not cross over tonight?" she repeated in amazement. "But we must, Sir Andrew, we must. There can be no question of cannot, and whatever it may cost, we must get a vessel tonight." But the young man shook his head sadly. "I am afraid it is not a question of cost, Lady Blakeney. There is a nasty storm blowing from France. The wind is dead against us. We cannot possibly sail until it is changed." Marguerite became deadly pale. She had not foreseen this. Nature herself was playing her a horrible, cruel trick. Percy was in danger, and she could not go to him because the wind happened to blow from the coast of France. "But we must go, we must," she repeated with strange, persistent energy. "You know we must. Can't you find a way?" "I have been down to the shore already," he said, "and had a talk to 2 skippers. It is quite impossible to set sail tonight, so every sailor assured me. No one," he added, looking significantly at Marguerite, "no one could possibly put out of Dover tonight." Marguerite at once understood what he meant. No one included Chauvelin as well as herself. She nodded pleasantly to Jellyband. "Well, then, I must resign myself," she said to him. "Have you a room for me?" "Oh, yes, your ladyship. A nice, bright, airy room. I'll see to it at once. And there is another one for Sir Andrew, both quite ready." "That's brave now, my honest Jelly," said Sir Andrew gaily, and clapping his worthy host vigorously on the back. "You can unlock both those rooms, and leave our candles here on the dresser. I vow you are dead with sleep, and her ladyship must have some supper before she retires. There, have no fear, friend of the rueful countenance. Her ladyship's visit, though at this unusual hour, is a great honour to thy house, and Sir Percy Blakeney will reward thee doubly, if thou seest well to her privacy and comfort." Sir Andrew had no doubt guessed the many conflicting doubts and fears which raged in honest Jellyband's head, and as he was a gallant gentleman, he tried by his brave hint to allay some of the worthy innkeeper's suspicions. He had the satisfaction of seeing that he had partially succeeded. Jellyband's rubicund countenance brightened somewhat at mention of Sir Percy's name. "I'll go and see to it at once, sir," he said with alacrity, and with less frigidity in his manner. "Has her ladyship everything she wants for supper?" "Everything, thanks, honest friend, and as I am famished and dead with fatigue, I pray you to see to the rooms." "Now tell me," she said eagerly, as soon as Jellyband had gone from the room. "Tell me all your news." "There's nothing else much to tell, Lady Blakeney," replied the young man. "The storm makes it, quite impossible for any vessel to put out of Dover this tide. But what seemed to you at first a terrible calamity is really a blessing in disguise. If we cannot cross over to France tonight, Chauvelin is in the same quandary." "He may have left before the storm broke out." "God grant he may," said Sir Andrew merrily, "for very likely he'll have been driven out of his course. Who knows? He may now even be lying at the bottom of the sea, for there is a furious storm raging, and it will fare ill with all small craft which happen to be out. But I fear we cannot build our hopes upon the shipwreck of that cunning devil, and of all his murderous plans. The sailors I spoke to all assured me that no schooner had put out of Dover for several hours. On the other hand, I ascertained that a stranger had arrived by coach this afternoon, and had, like myself, made some inquiries about crossing over to France." "And Chauvelin is still in Dover?" "Undoubtedly." "Shall I go waylay him and run my sword through him?" that were indeed the quickest way out of the difficulty. Nay, Sir Andrew, do not jest. Alas, I have often since last night caught myself wishing for that fiend's death. But what you suggest is impossible. The laws of this country do not permit of murder. It is only in our beautiful France that wholesale slaughter is done lawfully in the name of liberty and of brotherly love. Sir Andrew had persuaded her to sit down to the table, to partake of some supper, and to drink a little wine. This enforced rest of at least 12 hours, and the next tide, until the next tide, was sure to be terribly difficult to bear to the state of intense excitement in which she was. Obedient in these small matters like a child, Marguerite tried to eat and drink. Sir Andrew, with that profound sympathy born to all those who are in love, made her almost happy by talking to her about her husband. He recounted to her some of the daring escapes the brave Scarlet Pimpernel had contrived for the poor French fugitives, whom a relentless and bloody revolution was driving out of their country. He made her eyes glow with enthusiasm by telling her of his bravery, his ingenuity, his resourcefulness, when it meant snatching the lives of men, women, and even children from beneath the very edge of that murderous, ever-ready guillotine. He even made her smile quite merrily by telling her of the Scarlet Pimpernel's quaint and many disguises, through which he had baffled the strictest watch which he set against him at the barricades of Paris. This last time, the escape of the Comtesse de Tournay and her children had been a veritable masterpiece. Blakeney, disguised as a hideous old market woman in filthy cap and straggling grey locks, was a sight fit to make the gods laugh. Marguerite laughed heartily as Sir Andrew tried to describe Blakeney's appearance, whose gravest difficulty always consisted in his great height, which in France made disguise doubly difficult. Thus an hour wore on. There were many more to spend in enforcing inactivity in Dover. Marguerite rose from the table with an impatient sigh. She looked forward with dread to the night in the bed upstairs, with terribly anxious thoughts to keep her company, and the howling of the storm to chase sleep away. She wondered where Percy was now. The Daydream was a strong, well-built, sea-going yacht. Sir Andrew had expressed the opinion that no doubt she had got in the lee of the wind before the storm broke out, or else perhaps had not ventured into the open air at all, but was lying quietly at Gravesend. Briggs was an expert skipper, and Sir Percy handled a schooner as well as any master mariner. There was no danger for them from the storm. It was long past midnight when at last Marguerite retired to rest. As she had feared, sleep sedulously avoided her eyes. Her thoughts were of the blackest during these long, weary hours, whilst that incessant storm raged which was keeping her away from Percy. The sound of the distant breakers made her heart ache with melancholy. She was in the mood when the sea has a saddening effect upon the nerves. It is only when we are very happy that we can bear to gaze merrily upon the vast and limitless expanse of water, rolling on and on with such persistent, irritating monotony to the accompaniment of your thoughts, whether grave or gay. When they are gay, the waves echo their gaiety, but when they are sad, then every breaker as it rolls seems to bring additional sadness, and to speak to us of hopelessness and of the prettiness of all of our joys. Just going to take a look at how long this next chapter is, because I think, it's fairly long chapter, so we're going to go ahead and, here, I'll turn on my show again. So we're going to go ahead and end the story time stream a little early, but I will be back with some Terraria possibly. I've also been playing Raft recently, and then some RuneScape I've been doing to prepare for. Actually, you know what? Maybe I will do some RuneScape because I want to try to get some higher level gear for when we do the anniversary stream. So, quick reminder, the second was my first year streamiversary, and so I'm going to be doing a co-stream with Polyswags on Monday the 18th, same starting time as usual. It's going to be 2 to 4 Pacific time, and I chose to do RuneScape because it is a free-to-play. There's plenty that a free player can do. You can, of course, opt to buy membership. They also, since I last played many, many years ago, made it so that you can use in-game currency to purchase membership. So I'll probably be working towards that. But yeah, it's open for anybody to come and play RuneScape. You can download RuneScape from their website, which is just runescape.com, or they have it on Steam as well, and I have it attached to my Steam account. And my username on there is Storytime Sun. So if you do go ahead and play RuneScape, if you decide to start a new account, feel free to friend me there. Again, it's Storytime Sun, and we're just going to do some low-level stuff. So really the only thing you would have to do to prepare for it would be to do... Okay. That sounds like a good idea. Really the only thing you have to do to prepare for the stream is to just get through the tutorial. That's about it. So I will be back in a few moments. If you're heading off, I hope you have a great rest of your day, whatever time of day it is. Enjoy your nap, Corel. And I'll let you know when I have the stream back up for the gaming stream. I'll see you in a moment.